Welcome once again to Heart of a Shepherd. Our scripture reading today is Proverbs chapter 7 and chapter 8. Now, this will be the first video devotional for today. The focus, Proverbs chapter 7. I've titled it A Spiritual Cancer Called Adultery. Proverbs chapter 7. Well, as the title indicates, Proverbs 7 continues Solomon's warnings about the destructive consequences of immorality, which is a recurring theme throughout the book of Proverbs. Now, I want to encourage you to read the entire assignment for today, but for brevity, I'm going to focus on Proverbs chapter 7 and verses 1 through 7. You'll notice in verses 1 through 3, we have what I would describe as a preamble, that is an introduction. And here we read in verse 1, "My son, keep my words," literally, observe my sayings. "Lay up my commandments with thee," or treasure my commandments, commandments being the do's and the don'ts. Verse 2, "Keep my commandments and live, and my law, my instructions, as the apple," literally the pupil, "of thine eye. Bind them," that is the instructions and the commandments and the teachings of the Father, "bind them upon thy fingers. Write them upon the table of thine heart." Solomon was concerned that his son might be led astray by sexual desire. He understood the pain caused by his parents' infidelity, that is, David and Bathsheba. And sadly, Solomon ended up following the same path. And so we read in another portion of Scripture, in 1 Kings 11, verse 4, that it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect or whole with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. I would suggest to you that Solomon fell into a pattern common among 21st century fathers. That is, he exemplified the philosophy, "Do as I say, not as I do." You know, children should open their hearts to their parents' instructions, and therefore, understanding the wisdom in Proverbs 7, I want to invite you to consider a twofold application of verses 1 through 3. The first is found in verse 1, and that is that parents must call their sons and daughters to moral purity, and then demonstrate this through their own words and actions. And then in verse 2 and 3, that wise sons and daughters should treasure their parents' instructions and remember them when faced with temptations. And then the warning. I would suggest to you, considering verses 4 and 5, the subtlety of flattering lips. Now, in an earlier study, we considered the lips of an adulterous woman that Solomon rather, described as like honey in a honeycomb. And so now again, we're looking at the flattering lips. Proverbs 7, verse 4 and 5. "Say unto wisdom, thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman, that they, wisdom and understanding, may keep thee from the strange," or the immoral woman, "from the stranger which flattereth with her words." So we have a contrast. The words of wisdom, or the words again of a strange, immoral, adulterous woman, which Solomon says, listen, it's flattering, but it leads away. Now, concerned with the temptations of a strange woman, Solomon urged his son to love wisdom as a sister and understanding as a close friend. Well, sadly, it was not just what Solomon taught, but what he practiced that became his son's moral guide. We have a reminder that I want to share with you concerning Lot, the nephew of Abraham, and this is recorded in Genesis 13, verses 10 through 13, and then chapter 19 and verse 1. I would suggest that this is a father's haunting failure. And so no parent, you see, can neglect the duty of teaching and warning their children about sexual dangers in a corrupt society. And yet some fathers and mothers emulate the reckless example of Lot, Genesis 13. We remember as we studied the scriptures how he moved his sons and daughters away from the influence of Uncle Abraham, a man that loved and feared God, a man of faith. He moved his children from Abraham into Sodom, an ancient city that was known for its perversity and its wickedness. Now, although the scriptures describe Lot as righteous in 2 Peter 2:8, the fact is that he did not teach or warn his children to fear the Lord. When Lot learned that God's judgment was imminent, that is, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he vainly urged his sons and daughters to flee Sodom to escape God's wrath. And tragically, we read in Genesis 19 and verse 14 that Lot's sons-in-laws refused his warning because he appeared to them as one that mocked. In other words, Lot had failed as a father. Here's a closing thought today. Solomon, in our study, advised his son to listen, remember, and engrave his words and his instructions on that son's heart so they could serve as a moral compass. Chapter 7 and verse 5. However, the example Solomon set, not just what he said, became his son's model. Now, questions for you. Are you conscious of the dangers our immoral culture presents? Are you exemplifying moral behavior and guiding your children to make ethical decisions? Are you leading your family to associate with and seek the friendship of the righteous, such as Abraham? Remember, sexual immorality is a moral cancer that damages life, career, marriage, and family. Well, that concludes our study of a couple of verses here in this chapter. Our next study, the second video that will follow, is taken from Proverbs chapter 8. God bless and bye-bye.